So if we type in my name, submit that, and if we refresh GetForm, my name has been submitted here. We're able to send custom backend, a custom form service, our own forms while still using the kind of native Webflow functionality. Hello and welcome to another single episode of Webflow and Code, where I teach you the underlying code you're writing in Webflow. Today is a sad day because we've reached the end of our Webflow Forms Masterclass series. I know it's been a great old journey. If you haven't watched any of these episodes up to date, we have built multi-stage native forms, so kind of passing data between different forms on different pages. We've looked at conditional fields. We've just looked at the elements themselves and then more advanced elements that you can only achieve through code. And today we land on being able to submit to a custom backend from within Webflow whilst still using the native success and error messaging that you can design within the interface. So if you're stoked for that, then please do stick around and we'll get right into it right after this. So if you're new to the channel, my name is Samuel Gregory, and on this channel we talk about all things front end, including no code like Webflow and Pinegrow, and most importantly, I love a bit of accessibility. So if that gets your juices flowing, then please do hit the subscribe where you can be up to date with everything that I do when I do it, whatever that might be. So right off the bat, I'm going to tell you the next section is all on backend code and Node. So if you're not interested in that, I'll leave timestamps in the description below and hopefully on the screen now, where you can jump ahead to what we actually need to do in Webflow to be able to interact with custom backends, some other form-based services and things like that. Now, right off the bat, I want to tell you that I am not a backend developer. I'm a front-end developer through and through. I know how to dip into backend code. I sort of, as you can see, know how to write basic backend code, but there are certain issues in here with regards to security and various things like that. So there are libraries out there that write a lot of this code for you and to do all that protection. So it's not often recommended to write everything out from scratch. So let's just take a look at what we got going on here. This is what we call a Node server, built-in Express. Express is a library that is a Node package that allows us to create servers very easy. Most of this you can ignore. We're just initializing the Express server. We're setting up a few things, setting up a few headers and various things like that. This is stuff I was actually playing with. This isn't necessary. So first of all, we've got a URL here called success. Now I've set this up on my own API. This is built off of the base URL that you've uploaded your Node server to. So we've got a success, a get request here under success, and then we just respond. We've got a fail get request here, which returns a 404, message you failed. We have a post request here at /post, and we return 200 with a message of success. And then something funky is going on here. And here we have a root URL here, which what we're going to be doing most of our playing with. And that is just doing some 400 and 200. But we're just going to go through these now and play with them. And I can demonstrate to you what they're doing. In fact, let's probably get this code. Paste that in there. So we've got reference to this here, and we can sort of take a look at it. So the first thing we need to do is escape this and run our server. So this is all online. This is all running on AWS, and we can inspect what happens here. The second part to this demonstration is we're using a tool here called Postman, and it allows me to interact with my server and play around with it and send it different types of data. It's a good way to debug things, basically. So first of all, you can remember we've got our success URL here. So in Postman here, we've got a get request, and there's the base URL, which you don't really need to worry about, but you've got the /success there. So when we hit that, we should see a return of 200 with a message, with a success message. And of course, there we go. Oh, I spelled message wrong there. If we go to the fail one, go here, then you can see that we've got a 404 and that you failed. So we've got 2 GET requests here, the success and the fail. We've spoken about the different structure and the different formats of get data versus post data. Get data, if you remember on our multi-stage form, we actually pass it in the URL and it's query parameters in the URL. Let's demonstrate what a get request looks like here. So I've got a pre-set up query here that Postman allows me to do test query, but you'll see it's rewriting that URL just like we saw in our multi-stage form. If you look here, I'm just logging out what the query is. So if I get our response here, you can see that test query has console logged, and this is important because we can't see any of that on the front end. This is what your form or your website will see, just the message, whereas on the back end we've got access to that. We can do whatever we want with that. We can write it to a database. You wouldn't really do that with a get, but we can write it to a database. We can return different things. So I mean, as an example, let's quickly nip in our success. We can go hello space request.query.name, right? So we're just saying hello, whatever the name is, and run our server again. And then we get back to Postman. So we've got test. This should not respond. This should say hello space in the message because we've not sent it a name. Hello, okay, undefined. So we could probably do a bit of error handling there. But if we send it a name and then put it as wombat, then we should see wombat in the response message. So we choose what we want to send back to the back end, and we've given it, like I said, a success message of okay and a message of hello space, and then whatever, and then you can see the console logging there. There was the one that we sent but we didn't do anything with, and then that's the failed one, and then that's the correctly spelled one. So that's a GET request in a nutshell, passing it through the URL and then seeing it in the request.query. Now let's get into post. So you can see the code here. We've got a post request /post, and that's all set up for us already in Postman. And we're just simply responding with 200 and a message of success. But what I'm doing, I'm console logging anything that's sent in the body. Before we were sending parameters here, you can see that they're in parameters there and in the query string up here. As soon as I put something in the body, send that through, then you'll see that test wombat is right there in the body. Okay, and just as a reminder, it's the request.body, the difference being request.query, we've got request.body. So you can see how they're just treated differently, and we always recommend that post being a lot more secure way of sending data. Okay, so with that now, our final demonstration of the kind of differences. We've got this post request just to the root. If the name is missing from the body, then return a 404 and put an error, give an error saying you did not provide a name. If they do provide a name, then it goes through here and obviously returns them everything's okay. Once again, in here, you could do anything you want. You could write it to a database. You could send someone an email. Anything that Node allows you to do, you can do. And that's the kind of secret sauce to back-end code. You can do a lot of stuff, secure stuff with databases and such. So if we go through and send an empty post request to this base URL here, and we get a 400 bad request, you did not provide a name. The moment that we provide a name and we send that, this is where my lack of back-end code knowledge fails me, because I don't know how to fix that. But restart the server, send through the name, then we get a message, everything's hunky-dory, 200, and so forth. So that's a little bit on kind of behind the scenes of what's happening in the back-end code when you send a URL that's expecting form data. How we can respond to it, how can we do other things, we can reject it, and all the rest of it. So given that, if you want to interact with a service, then it should respond with conventions like this. So now we know a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes and kind of how get and post are treated differently. Now let's jump into Webflow and understand what we need to be doing in Webflow to be able to achieve any kind of interaction with any custom backend or any other external service. In our Webflow project here, I've just created a simple form here, and the settings are as followed. Let's make this right size. Now I've added in my custom URL here, which is where I'm going to be posting to. You can see it's the domain name that I've been using, and then just at the root, this is where our API is going to be responding to that name parameter, if you remember rightly. And I've set it as post because I've set it up in the backend that I can only accept post. If you were to send a get to this, it would fail. So we're sending a post to it, and then I've got your normal success and error states here. If you are interacting with MailChimp, then the next kind of steps are not necessary. For some reason, if you insert your own action, Webflow, it doesn't send it for you. You'll notice if you put your own URL in there and hit send, it will just navigate to whatever URL you put into that action. If you were to put in a MailChimp URL, that still works actually, and there's some documentation on Webflow's website on how you might want to submit a form to a MailChimp server, because obviously MailChimp's a popular email sign-up letter, and it just makes your life a bit easier. So if you're using MailChimp, don't worry about the next steps, but if you are sending it to anything else, then you're going to now need to follow this. So there's nothing different about the form except, of course, the name property there, which is what I'm expecting in the back end. If you're interacting with a service that needs certain parameters, then of course you need to make sure you've got those fields inside the form, and then the name matches up perfectly with the expected form fields. Okay, so basic form here. Now, if we go into my JavaScript code here, this is something I got off of an article, which I'll link below. Like I say, unfortunately, because we've put in our own action, Webflow doesn't send our form for us. So what we've got to do is, first of all, we've got to create a local variable of the Webflow. Let's call it a library. You don't need to worry too much about that, but we're saying if Webflow exists, then set it there. Otherwise, set it as an empty array. Okay. Then in that array, we want to push a new function, which we're going to define here. And the first thing we're going to do is take the submit event off of the document, which is what Webflow do. We're taking the submit event off the document. So now even though Webflow's choosing not to respond or send our form for us, this event is still there. So we want to make sure it doesn't take over or anything like that. So that's what that's doing. And now we're getting all the forms on the page, and that's really important to remember because this is all the forms on the page. If you wanted to say, if you wanted one form to be for Webflow, another form to be a custom form, then you'll need to do some fancy if statements. And if I'm kind and I like you enough, I might actually include that in the code pane, which I normally stick down in the description with all this code for you, so you can add it yourself. So but for this example, we're getting all the forms on the page, and on submit of that form, we're firing this function. Okay, so any form on the page, we're firing the submit function. First thing we're going to do is prevent the default behavior, which is the default behavior is to navigate to the other page, right? So we're preventing that. Next thing we're going to do is get the current instance of the form. So this just enables us to do other things a bit easier later down the line. So we're just storing the current form that's being submitted in a variable inside of this function. And now we're getting the submit button inside of that form. So we're getting of type submit, any element with type submit, which will be an input, inside of the form. This is kind of scoping this query within the form element which we got here. Otherwise, this would just get every single type input on the page. We're just making sure that's only inside of this form. And then what we're doing is we're getting the original text, and this will become clear as we work through it. We're just getting the value of the submit button, right? Which should be what you put here, button text, submit. Okay. And because this is only a function that's only firing once we hit submit of that form, we're setting the value of the submit button. So we've stored the original text. Now we're setting some new text to the submit input data attribute. So if we take a look at the code here, you can see our type input here, and then we've got this data wait attribute which says please wait. And you'll notice if you use Webflow native submission, the text will change to please wait or whatever you set in here. Okay, this is making sure that when they submit it, we're immediately setting that text to that. You can omit that, you can take that out if you don't want that to be, if you don't want to please wait. Now this is where we actually send the form data. This is kind of where all the magic happens, right? And we use this function called AJAX, and I've forgotten what AJAX, I think it's like asynchronous JavaScript across network, I don't know, something. It's an acronym for something, and this, all this is doing is taking is sending a request to wherever we define. Okay, so the first argument is the location where we're sending the data. Now we are using, because we want to use as much of this native settings as possible, we're getting the form attribute, the current form that's being submitted, we're getting the action attribute of that. Okay, so once we don't have to hard code that, we don't have to worry about this, we can kind of set it and forget it, and whatever's in our action here, that's what's going to be used to send our form data to. The next parameter is kind of the options of the form data. So you'll notice the method we're doing is we're setting the attribute method there, which is a post. So again, if you change that to get, it will respond accordingly. You don't have to worry about changing it here. And the data we're sending is we're serializing. This is a special jQuery function which takes all of the data inside of the form, and well, we can basically use that. We could just as easily say, const form data, if this makes more sense to you, and then we're saying the data is form data. Really up to you how you kind of want to do it. I thought it looked cleaner just to put it in there, but up to you. So this is the options now. We're sending the request. Now, how do we respond to it? So if it's successful, we're going to fire this done method. If it fails, we're going to fire this fail method. So if this is a success, we get our form and we hide it. Okay, I've mentioned that's optional, because of course you might not want to hide it, and you might want to leave the form there in case they want to send another thing. So you can remove that here, and then we're getting the sibling next to the form of wForm done. Now jumping back into our HTML here, Webflow gives you these two divs which are your success and failure states. Okay, they're just hidden elements. That's all they are there, and you can see they're next to the form, which is why we use siblings. So the sibling of the form that has a class of wForm done, we want to show it because it succeeded. We want to show it. Then we want to hide the fail sibling of that. Now this only makes sense if your user has sent the data and it's failed, they've corrected it, sent it again, and then it succeeded. We don't want both the error and success states being shown at the same time, so we're just hiding it. Okay, and then we're setting the submit button text back to that original text, which was submit. And you can kind of guess what we're going to do here on the fail is on the form. We're not hiding it because we of course want to give them the option to actually correct their mistake. And then we're getting the sibling of done and hiding it just in case, it's on there on the page. It doesn't hurt to do it. It's not going to break the page if it's not there. And then we show the failure state. And then of course setting the submit button back to the original text there. So here we go. If you remember rightly, we deny this if we don't insert a name. But if we do, then we allow it. So first of all, we submit it. Oops, there was a failure. We're showing that error state. Now, if I put in my name, submit, you'll see that now we thank the user, we hide the form, and we hide the error state. What we can also do here is actually redirect it to a new page on the success of this form. Now, we already know that we get that natively in Webflow, but as I say, if we're interacting with a custom backend, then we don't get the native kind of interface that Webflow provides us here. We don't get access to all this. So if we want it to redirect to a page, then what we need to do here is instead of showing and hiding the the various different states, if we comment that out, now we can do inside of the done function. So of course, if it succeeds, we can go window.location equals, and then we can actually get the, I've done a test here, data redirect. So whenever we put in something here, so I know I have a page 2 here, so we can go form dot data redirect, and this is the same as going form dot attribute data redirect, whatever you feel more comfortable doing, but those two basically do the same thing. We're getting the value of that, so in this case it will be page 2, and when we submit the form, it will actually redirect us using, again, the native Webflow interface. And just for a bit of fun, if I remember rightly, on this page 2, we accept a query parameter of name, or full name, I think it is, and we actually use that in the multi-stage form process. So you could add the query parameter of full name equals, and then get the parameter that was submitted. Sorry, this is all advanced stuff, but we're just having some fun here. And then pass that value through to the form and publish that. Submit that. Then we've now, if I just bring that down, it's now redirected us to page 2. We look at the code, that full name has been inserted as Sam, which is something we added from the previous step. Just a bit of fun there. So we're using the native Webflow functionality there inside of our custom form. So looking into a real life example here, now I've learned about this service called GetFrom, and it allows us to submit our own form content to this backend essentially. And I've created a custom form here. So if we go back to Webflow, and I've got my custom form URL here, which when you set yours up, it will have its own custom URL too, and we set that to post. The unfortunate thing about GetFrom is it actually doesn't respond. It doesn't respond with an error if there is some form of an error. So you're really left to your own devices to know that you're sending it the correct data. But if we just put back our hiding of the form, the showing of the done message, and the failure, and save that. So if we type in my name, submit that, we get a thank you message. And if we refresh GetFrom, you'll see that my name has been submitted here. So like I say, we don't get an error message if we were to send an empty string. Unfortunately, we don't get an error message. But you can see how this is now, we're able to send a custom backend, a custom form service, our own forms, while still using the kind of native Webflow functionality. You can combine this with the redirection if that's the way you want to go, but here's just a few ways that you can interact and deal with the response that you get from sending off some form data. So there we go. That just about wraps up the Webflow Forms Masterclass. If you have any questions on that, we did get a bit code heavy in that one, but it was always going to be. It's not a particularly amateur, or even intermediate kind of lesson. It's more advanced for sure. But if you are dealing with other services or things like that, then you probably won't have to worry about the back-end code. Just remember that inside of Webflow, what we need to do to actually bind our own submit method and respond accordingly to those submissions ourselves. Hopefully in time, Webflow allows this to run under its own, use its own Ajax function, because that's all Webflow is doing, is pretty much just doing this. But for whatever reason, it removes it whenever we insert our own action. So if you enjoyed this episode, then please do give it a like. It really motivates me and supports the channel. And if you haven't checked out the previous episodes of the Webflow Forms Masterclass, then I actually have a playlist that you can go to and kind of watch them from the beginning. If you have any thoughts around other form episodes that we could do, then I'm more than happy to hear it. Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the comments how you found this course. And until next time, happy no coding.